How many times have you been pulled into a conversation that had no exit strategy? How many times have you listened to a problem where it became clear halfway through that the person didn't actually want a solution? They didn't want a pivot. They didn't want a resource. They just wanted a witness to their own suffering. How many times have you felt your own energy, your own focus, and your own drive evaporate simply by being in the same room as someone else's venting? We often mistake these moments for support or team building. We tell ourselves that being a good leader means being a good listener, an open door, an emotional safety net. But there is a sensation we all know, but rarely name, the feeling of the slow leak. It's a physical sensation. Tightening in the back of the neck, sudden heaviness in the chest, the feeling of your internal battery dropping from 80% to 20% in the span of a 10-minute coffee is the heavy theatrical sign of a colleague that seems to carry the weight of the entire world on their shoulders. It's the "here we go again" tone of a meeting before the first agenda item is even read. A tone that signals defeat before the battle has even begun. It's the endless list of problems that arrives on your desk or in your inbox without a single solitary suggestion for a move. In leadership, we are taught to be empathetic. We are told to listen, to nod, and to be supportive. But if we are honest with ourselves, there is a dangerous point where empathy stops being a tool for connection and starts becoming an enabler for dysfunction. There is a line where holding space becomes subsidizing stagnation. This is the virus of whining. Whining is not just venting. It isn't a harmless release of pressure like steam from a kettle. It is a biological and psychological choice to stay small. It is an active declaration of powerlessness. And most dangerously of all, it is a highly contagious pathogen that can take down an entire high-performing culture in a matter of weeks, just like that. Stay with me until the end of this episode. We are going to look at the cold neuroscience of how complaining literally shrinks your brain, the deep philosophy of the victim's cage, and I will share a very personal reflection on a week where I felt physically bombarded by this virus, and the radical tactical steps I had to take to keep my own frequency from being pulled into the mud. Hello and welcome to the H2H experiment. I'm Joao and I'm your host. In today's episode, we are venturing into a territory that every leader faces, but few address with the necessary precision. We are deconstructing the destructive power of whining and learning how to reclaim our emotional agency from the noise of negativity. Let's start. To understand why whining is so destructive, we have to look under the hood. We have to look at the biological hardware that governs our perception of reality. Neuroscience gives us a very clear rule. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This is the principle of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Every time you complain, or even just think a complaining thought, you are physically strengthening the neural pathways for negativity. You are building a mental superhighway that leads directly to dissatisfaction. You are training your brain to become an expert at finding what's wrong, which effectively blinds you to the opportunity sitting right in front of you. But it gets much darker than just bad habits. Research from Stanford University has shown that complaining, or even just listening to someone else complain for 30 minutes or more, can physically damage the hippocampus. This is the part of our brain responsible for critical thinking, intelligent problem solving, and cognitive function. It's also one of the primary areas destroyed by Alzheimer's. You see, when you whine, you are flooding your system with cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol is designed for short term survival. It's the chemical that helps you run from a tiger. But when it becomes a chronic presence in your bloodstream because of constant complaining, it puts your brain into a permanent state of amygdala hijack. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that makes you a leader, a strategist, and a creator, is effectively taken offline. Furthermore, our brains have a natural negativity bias. Evolutionarily, we are wired to remember the sting of a bee more than the sweetness of honey because the sting could kill us. Whining exploits this bias. It keeps the brain in a threat detection mode. Whining is a form of biological self sabotage. You are literally making yourself less intelligent with every venting session. You are taking a slow acting poison every morning and then wondering why you feel too weak to lead, too tired to innovate, and too drained to care. You aren't just sharing your feelings, you are reshaping your physical brain for failure. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche spoke extensively about a concept called resentment. It's a French term for a deep-seated resentment that occurs when we feel powerless to change our reality. Instead of taking action to change the world, the whiner creates what Nietzsche called slave morality. They start to believe that their suffering makes them virtuous and that anyone who is not suffering, anyone who is succeeding, or anyone they perceive as the system is inherently evil. This is a seductive trap because it provides a false sense of moral superiority without requiring any of the work of actual change. It turns the whiner into a righteous victim, where the very act of complaining becomes their primary contribution to the world. This is the birth of the victim mentality. In this dark philosophy, the whiner finds a twisted kind of comfort. If I am the victim, I am no longer responsible for the outcome. If the market is bad, I don't have to evolve. If the boss is the problem, I don't have to perform. By whining, the person is externalizing their internal discomfort, blaming the world for a lack of agency they have chosen for themselves. They become a passenger in their own life, screaming at the driver while refusing to touch the steering wheel. But the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, offered a different path, the internal fortress. The Stoics taught that while we cannot control the external events, the bad weather, the delayed shipment, the difficult board member, we have absolute sovereign control over our judgment of those events. Aurelius famously wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The whiner fights reality. They exhaust themselves screaming at the rain for being wet. The leader accepts reality as it is, not as they wish it to be, and then asks, "Now what?" Whining is the sound of someone locking their own prison cell from the inside and then complaining about the lack of a key. The key is, and always has been, your own response. It is the realization that while you cannot choose your circumstances, you always choose your frequency. Now, let's talk about the cost to the people around the whiner, because whining is never a solitary act. it requires an audience. In H2H leadership, we talk a lot about frequency. Every person in an organization vibrates at a certain emotional frequency. You can feel it when you walk into a room. Is the energy constructive and expansive, or is it entropic and shrinking? Is it thick with possibility or heavy with grievance? Whining is emotional littering. Imagine walking to a beautiful, pristine park, a place designed for peace and growth, and seeing someone casually throwing bags of trash onto the grass. You'd be outraged, wouldn't you? You'd see that as a violation of the collective space. Yet, we allow people to walk into our offices, our meetings, and throw emotional trash all over our mental space every single day. We call it venting. I actually call it vomiting, but it's actually a violation of the cultural air quality. Psychologists call this emotional contagion. We have spoken about it several times. Humans have mirror neurons designed to help us empathize, but those same neurons make us susceptible to the low frequency vibrations of others. When one person whines, it triggers the stress response in everybody else. It lowers the collective IQ of the room. It's the emotional equivalent of secondhand smoke. Even if you aren't the one complaining, you are still inhaling the toxins. This creates what I call a negativity debt. Like financial debt, every unanswered complaint carries interest. That interest is paid in the form of quiet exhaustion. Your high performance, the people who actually want to build, the creators, the problem solvers, eventually just stop contributing. Not because they can't do the work, because they are very capable, but because they are tired of carrying the dead weight of the emotional vampires who feed on their energy. Eventually, the talent leaves the room, and you are left with a culture of people who are experts at explaining why things are impossible. You are left with a culture of polite decay. All right, now I want to be very real with you about this past week. I'm going to share a bit of my personal experience on this matter. Because as much as I studied this, I'm not immune to the gravity of a low frequency environment. I found myself in the middle of a perfect storm. I was bombarded. It seemed like every conversation I had, every message I received was a variation of a complaint. Why the client's being difficult? Who forgot to send the update? Why this new process is too hard? We can't get ahead. We are never going to finish this project. Why can't this or that person do their work right? I don't like this person. I don't like that person. It seems like no one knows what they're doing. It was a barrage of low frequency energy coming from all directions. And I'll tell you, it was difficult. I felt my own frequency starting to drop. I felt my brain fog that comes when cortisol starts to take over. I felt the urge to either snap back in frustration or even worse, to join in the chorus of whining just to feel like I belonged in the conversation. It's a seductive pull, I have to say. The desire to be one of the guys by bonding over how bad things are, that's very tricky. We call it commiserating, but it's actually a suicide pact for productivity. But I had to stop. I had to realize that my emotional state is my responsibility, regardless of the environment I'm in. I had to practice what I call tactical presence. When the bombardment reached its peak, I physically stepped away. I closed my laptop, I walked outside, I took 3 deep conscious breaths to clear the cortisol from my prefrontal cortex. I had to literally evacuate the emotional smog to reset my frequency. And I had to do it several times during the week. Then, every time I went back with a different boundary. It wasn't easy, I have to say. It required a massive amount of internal discipline, awareness, to stay grounded and not let that secondhand smoke of negativity get into my lungs. If you're a leader being bombarded right now, hear me. You're not being mean by setting boundaries. You are being a steward of the team's energy. You are the filter for the organization's lungs. You are required to stop the littering. Now, let's take this to another perspective. Whining is the ultimate hallmark of a fixed mindset. It's a belief system that assumes things are this way, and all we can do is react to the unfairness of it all. It is a mindset that looks for obstacles to justify inaction. To a whiner, a challenge is an excuse. To a victim, a barrier is proof that they shouldn't even try. A growth mindset, on the other side, doesn't ignore the problem. It doesn't practice toxic positivity by pretending the house isn't on fire while holding a cup of tea. It acknowledges the friction, it sees the failure, but it immediately asks, what is the move? What can we learn? How do we pivot? To a leader, a challenge is an input. It's the raw material for innovation. There is a massive, unbridgeable gap between grievance and growth. Grievance looks backward. It looks for someone to blame. It seeks validation for its pain. It says, this should not be happening. Why is this happening to me? Growth looks forward. It looks for a way to build. It seeks solution for the future. It says, this is happening. Now what? How do we use this? As a leader, you must stop rewarding the grievance. If you listen to a whiner for an hour without requiring a solution, you are not being supportive. You are paying for their emotional littering with your own time. And we all know how time is valuable. But not only time, your own health and your own intelligence. You are effectively subsidizing the decay of your own culture. You are telling the team that the most effective way to get your attention is to fail and complain about it. Change the incentive, reward the move. Okay, now let's move to the H2H experiment of the week. This one I call the 24-hour no whine challenge. This week, I want you to conduct a two-step experiment on yourself and your environment to test the air quality of your leadership and reclaim your hippocampal power. Step 1. For the next 24 hours, commit to zero whining. This means no complaints about the weather, the traffic, the coffee, the printer, or the colleague who didn't CC you on that email. If you catch yourself starting to whine, stop mid-sentence. Don't judge yourself, just stop. Observe how much mental energy you save when you stop leaking it through the hole of constant complaining. Notice how much sharper your brain feels by 5 p.m. You will find that you have a surplus of energy that you usually spend on being annoyed. Step 2. In your meetings this week, implement a solution tax. When someone brings a complaint, politely stop the momentum of the whining before it turns into a group session and say, I understand the challenge. To continue this conversation, you must now bring two potential solutions or tell me one action step you have already taken to address it. Watch what happens. The professional whiners, the people who use negativity as their primary social currency, will suddenly become silent because their currency is no longer accepted. Meanwhile, the problem solvers in the room, the ones who have been quiet because they were tired of being shouted down by the noise of the grievance, will finally get the oxygen they needed to breathe and innovate. You are effectively cleaning the air. Now let's start to wrap up this episode. Whining is a virus that thrives in the dark. Quiet corners of polite culture. It dies the moment it is met with the light of accountability and the heat of decisive action. Leadership is not about being a dumping ground for other people's emotional trash. It's not about being the receiver of complaint. Leadership is about holding a high enough frequency that the whining has nowhere to land. It is about building a culture where the move is always more important than the grievance. It is about choosing growth over comfort every single time. If this episode resonated with you, especially if you've had a week like mine where you felt like you were drowning in secondhand stress, I invite you to join the movement of awareness. Follow our conversations and share your no whine results on LinkedIn. Explore our frameworks for emotional regulation and high frequency culture at the h2hexperiment.com or the ECXO platform through our articles. We also have some ebooks available on Gumbo. And for the deep dive into the evolution of human to human leadership, pick up the HX Revolution book series on Amazon. Thank you for listening. Thank you for protecting your peace. And thank you for having the courage to choose action over complaint. Because a whiner never changed the history of a company, but a conscious leader just might. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.